there's a lot of debate these days on whether America was in fact founded on Christian values and principles or not. And I think the debate usually centers more around what the founding fathers said. But what you mentioned right now brings into focus the fact that really the beginnings of our nation is not even necessarily with the revolution and the Declaration of Independence, but really with those men and women who came from Europe to America, to this area specifically, with a dream of founding a city on a hill and a nation that would allow them to live out their spirituality in a biblical way and to establish a godly nation. And about their spirituality and their clear Christian conviction, there can be no doubt. You may wonder about Thomas Jefferson or George Washington or whoever, but these men and women were clearly passionate about the kingdom of God. And so wouldn't you say that that's where the foundation of the spiritual foundation of our nation is? It's not necessarily in the other part, because I think it's a development, it's an offshoot of that. But really it is in this beginning.
Correct. Pilgrims came here in 1620, and they're the ones that set the trajectory to what America is today. And it's a spiritual trajectory. People think that we have political freedom because it just comes about through humanism. But its actual spiritual freedom leads to political freedom. As the people become less spiritually free, they become less politically free. The Bible is very clear. He who Jesus sets free is free indeed. So God has done a work here in Massachusetts. This is where it started. And like you said, there's people that are trying to change our history and that understanding our spiritual heritage. It was Michelle Obama who said that we need to change our history. Now, how do you change history? You can't. But the bottom line is what we see here in Boston, and why are we here? I mean, I'm born and raised in California, live in Nashville now. Why are we here in Boston? And we're just getting a glimpse. We don't have the whole picture. But it's kind of like when God told Abraham, he said, go to a new land. Well, where am I going to go? Well, go that direction. Well, what's there? You'll find out when you get there. And God has directed our hearts towards Boston. And in a sense, as I see Plymouth as a spiritual Jerusalem, where God set the trajectory of this country, likewise with Boston, I believe that he's doing things here that is going to affect the rest of the country. And I almost see the Christians here in Boston as the Christians that were in Jerusalem in the book of Acts. They were being persecuted from the Jews. They were being persecuted from the Roman Gentiles, and they were getting squished in between. And so the Christians here in Boston feel the same way. But yet, where was the church the strongest in the Old Testament? It was in Jerusalem, under that persecution. And likewise, what we find, and you say that we're from Nashville, Tennessee, the Bible Belt, and granted, but it's cultural in a lot of respects. People that go to church here in Boston, they're countercultural. They're strong in their faith. They pray, they fast, they know their word. And they're the ones that are, in essence, ushering in this secret revival that you're talking about, Basil. Or I think you were talking about it, Pastor, this secret revival that's taking place here. So we're just one spoke in the wheel, and we're not here to save Boston. We are joining the people with Boston. If anything, we're being fed by the Christians here in Boston because of their vision and because of their strength. And they see things in their spirit. It's exciting.
As we go 100 years after Plymouth, from 1720 to 1735, the first Great Awakening was ushered in by the colonists. And they had pretty liberal churches at the time. They were not excited about the Great Awakening. The commoners, the common folk, got on fire for the Lord, got saved. And it began then to go to the Black Robe Regiment, which were black robe clergy. They just wore black robes wherever they went, so everybody identified them. These Black Robe Regiment men became excited about this and began to preach to the colonists like George Washington and our founding fathers, Jefferson and Adams. And when the revolution broke out, Washington said, I want a Black Robe Regiment member, a pastor, in every regiment in the colonial army. They were the most hated by the British when the War of Independence broke out. They came after them first and their churches first because they were the, quote, instigators of religious liberty and independence, which was the reason why they came over to Plymouth, for religious freedom. And that's what the independence was. And today I'm a proud member of the 21st Century Black Robe Regiment. And in Florida, I was able to contact Dan and Phil and joined them in this idea of bringing, and we were doing the same things on our radio shows. And we got together as a kindred spirit and formed and said, we want to help the pastors here in Boston. We want to be an aid to them and encourage them. Black Robe Regiment, Dan's been a pastor as well in the past. And so we're excited to be able to do that, and we want to do that through the broadcast medium here.
Well, you know, in reading some of your materials, in one of your websites, I saw a quote from Dwight L. Moody suggesting that when things go wrong in our nation, the pulpit is responsible. Charles Finney. Okay. And, you know, that leads us to think about, well, if revival is going to take place, if change is going to happen in America, it has to start with the church. It has to start with ministers.
That's right. We felt that the very three parts. First, Christian revival. That's the basis of the correction in our country, to restore our country. Not to transform it, but to reform it. And then secondly, reform the politics and get the corruption out of it and so forth. And then reclaim America. But it starts with the Christians. It started that way at the beginnings that we just talked about, that Phil talked about in Plymouth. It started in the Revolutionary War, you know, to reclaim America by reforming and reviving the Christians out of apathy into action, bringing back our moral virtues.
Where do we stand right now in that process, would you say? Where is the church right now in America?
It's in bad shape. There's exceptions. There always has been. You know, it's sort of like Elijah. You know, Elijah was, there was a stage where he got pretty discouraged and pretty depressed because he felt like he was the only one. And God, you know, took him into a cave and showed him that there were, you know, hundreds that had not bowed the knee to Baal. But they were pretty silent. They were so silent that, so those faithful ones were silent. You know, it's like, I tell you a great story in the Bible, you know, the story of David and Goliath. You know, we hear that story. Now, here's what you'll never hear about that story. The story starts off, it says, and children of Israel, or the Philistines were encamped at, I'm trying to think of the name of the valley of something that belongeth unto Judah. I can't remember the name of the valley. But anyway, here's the thing. Judah was a pretty good ways into Israel. Now, if I read that correctly, what that means is that the Philistines had come in and the Philistines had taken all the land up to there. And their intent was not to stop there. Their intent was to go the rest of the way. They weren't satisfied with what they had taken. They wanted it all. We're there in America. Listen, this is a spiritual war. Jesus Christ said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's either true or not. Well, if that is true, then my war is not against Obama. My war is not against the left. My war is not against the atheists. My war is not against the pro abortionist. My fight is not, the battle's deeper than that. And until I begin to understand that the battle is beneath the surface, I'm always going to be fighting the surface battle. And if I fight the surface battle, all I'm going to do is maybe pull a fruit off of a tree and break a limb off of a tree, but I'm going to do nothing to have victory. And so we have to fight this thing where it begins. It's a spiritual battle. At that battlefield, you know, you got the giant. We know the story. Everybody knows the story. And Goliath goes down there every day, and he strikes fear in the heart of all the children of God. And they're all sitting there, and they're wringing their hands, and they're saying, what are we going to do? What's in that valley is bigger than any of us. There's not a one of us that has a chance to, you know, we're averaging 5 foot tall, and that guy's 10 foot tall. He's bigger than anything we've ever seen. He's the greatest champion. He's been everywhere. He's defeated everyone. And there's no one that can stand up to him. That's where the church is in America. It cowers back. It says, oh no. But the courage of one individual walking down on that battlefield with the strength of God, realizing that the giant that day was not a 10-foot fellow that was down there in a valley, but that God that held a universe in his hand. And David's like, why are y'all afraid of that when you got that? And he understood that principle. He was the only person that day that saw beyond the physical. And that's the problem in the church. The church does not, even though we talk about the spiritual, we don't see beyond the physical. We look at the physical world and we wring our hands and we say, what can we do about it? My goodness, we can't do anything about it, but we got a God that can do a lot about it. And David understood that. And David went down there empowered by the Lord, and that day great victory was won. But then there's a verse that says this. It says, and the children of Israel, the armies of Israel, rose up and they pursued the Philistines. And they chased them back to the gates of Gath and the gates of Ekron, which belonged to Philistia. Not only did they have a victory in the valley that day, but that victory encouraged, the courage of one encouraged the rest. And that encouragement caused them to take up their arms and realize we are a mighty force for God. And they pursued those Philistines and they took back their land. This country was given to us by the church. And what I'm talking about is by Christians. And until Christians realize that we still have the same power of God to take back that which has been stolen, this country does not belong to Satan. God forbid that we stand here and sit here and say that we cannot do anything about it. Can I make a difference? I don't know. But I know this, I'll make no difference if I don't try. Could that guy on Tiananmen Square have stopped that tank? No, but he'd have slowed him up a little bit. And if 50 people had gotten in front of that tank, it'd have slowed it up quite a bit. And if 1,000 people had been emboldened by the courage of the one to get in front of that tank couldn't have made it over them. But somewhere along the line, there has to be a David, there has to be a Daniel, there has to be a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, there has to be an Esther, there has to be a Joseph. There has to be those individuals that believe so strongly in the power of Almighty God that they're not willing to be silent and they're willing to be what God has called them to be. And I believe that's what we represent here.